I went to my sister's house after a long time, just to spend a few days with her and see how she was doing. She had been married for almost 2 years, but I noticed in her voice over the phone that she didn't sound as cheerful as before. I missed her laughter, the way she used to talk about her dreams and little things. So I decided to visit, thinking my presence might make her feel better. When I reached her home, she welcomed me warmly, but her eyes told a different story. Her smile looked practiced, as if she had learned to hide her feelings behind it. The house was large and quiet, filled with expensive furniture but lacking warmth. Her husband was polite yet distant, always busy on his phone. Her father-in-law, Mr. Rahman, greeted me with respect and a calm, composed tone. There was something about him, dignified but lonely, that first evening felt slow. My sister and I sat in her room, talking softly so no one would overhear. She tried to convince me that everything was fine, but I could sense she was tired. I asked her if she was happy, and she just smiled and said, "Happiness changes with time." I didn't ask more. Sometimes silence says everything. Later at dinner, the family sat together. The atmosphere was formal, like everyone followed invisible rules. Mr. Rahman asked me simple questions about my studies and my parents. His voice was calm, his words respectful. I noticed everyone listened carefully when he spoke but didn't speak freely around him. There was no rudeness, but also no closeness. That night, when everyone went to sleep, I stood near the balcony. The house looked peaceful but carried an emptiness that I couldn't explain. The ticking of the clock was the only sound in the hallway. Suddenly, I heard Mr. Rahman's voice behind me. He asked softly if I was finding everything comfortable. I turned around and smiled, saying yes. He nodded, then said, "Tomorrow, if you have some free time, can you help me arrange some old family albums? I've been meaning to organize them." I agreed without hesitation. It sounded harmless. The next morning, after breakfast, I went to the study. It was a room filled with books, framed pictures, and a faint scent of old paper. Mr. Rahman was already there, carefully opening a box of photographs. He thanked me for helping. We began sorting through pictures, family gatherings, childhood moments, old memories. Every photo carried a story, and as he spoke, I noticed how his eyes softened when he talked about his late wife. He told me she was a kind woman who kept the family together. After her passing, he said, the house never felt the same. There was an ache in his voice that made me quiet. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. Sometimes, that's all people need, is someone to listen. As we arranged the albums, I saw pictures of my sister's wedding. She looked so happy in them, glowing with excitement. I couldn't help comparing that image to the quiet person I had seen last night. Something had changed, but I couldn't tell what. Mr. Rahman looked at those pictures for a moment and said, "Life doesn't always go as we expect, but we must learn to keep moving." The hours passed quickly. Before leaving, I thanked him for sharing the memories. He smiled and said, "Thank you for listening." It's rare these days to find someone who truly does. His tone was gentle but heavy with meaning. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about those photographs and the stories behind them. Every family hides its share of silence and regret. I didn't realize that by helping him that morning, I had stepped into a story far deeper than I understood. I closed my eyes, unaware that what began as a simple visit to my sister's house was about to uncover emotions I had never known before. The next day began quietly. My sister had gone to the market with her mother-in-law, and I found myself alone in the house with Mr. Rahman again. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, giving the rooms a calm glow. I made tea for everyone, and when I took a cup to him, he smiled kindly and asked me to sit for a few minutes. He began speaking softly, asking about my studies and my future plans. I told him I wanted to do something meaningful in life, something that made people happy. He listened with genuine interest, not interrupting, just nodding occasionally. There was something peaceful in the way he talked, calm, measured, and full of thought. After a while, he brought out another box of photographs, saying there were still many memories left to sort. As we worked together, the conversation shifted naturally. He shared stories from his youth, how he had built everything from nothing, and how his biggest loss had been his wife. Every time he mentioned her, his voice grew quieter. I could feel his loneliness even when he smiled. There was a certain emptiness in his eyes that no wealth could hide. He said, "Sometimes, people see us surrounded by everything and assume we have no pain. But loss doesn't care about what we own." His words stayed with me long after he said them. I realized that behind his calmness, there was a man who had carried guilt and sorrow for years. He told me he regretted making decisions that hurt others, especially his son. I didn't understand at first, but he explained that he had arranged his son's marriage too quickly, believing he was doing what was right for the family. Sometimes, he said, we choose what looks right, not what feels right. Hearing that made me think of my sister. Maybe that was why she looked so tired, why she didn't smile freely anymore. The realization made me sad, but I didn't want to judge anyone. Families are complicated, and every story has sides no one fully sees. As the afternoon passed, we kept working quietly. Occasionally our eyes met when he handed me a photo or thanked me, and there was always respect in his gaze, nothing more. But still, I felt something unusual, a connection born out of understanding. It wasn't attraction, it was empathy. I was seeing him not as my sister's father-in-law but as a human being who had lost more than anyone realized. When my sister came back later, she looked surprised to see us together in the study. She didn't say anything, but her silence carried something sharp. I smiled and tried to change the topic, telling her we were just sorting old pictures. She nodded but didn't look convinced. That evening, the dinner table felt heavier than usual. My sister avoided eye contact with both of us, and her husband remained quiet as always. Mr. Rahman tried to keep the conversation polite, but the warmth from the previous day was gone. I sensed a wall forming between everyone, built from unspoken doubts. Later that night, I sat on the balcony again, thinking about everything. The silence of the house was deeper than before. Mr. Rahman's words echoed in my mind about choices, regrets, and how sometimes good intentions can still hurt others. I began to understand that every home hides stories that are never told aloud. The smiles we see often cover pain we can't imagine. I didn't know why, but I felt closer to his sorrow than I should have. It was as if the sadness in his heart had quietly reached mine. Before going to bed, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Mr. Rahman, passing by. He looked at me and simply said, "Thank you for your kindness." I nodded and said, "You don't need to thank me. Everyone deserves someone to listen to them." He smiled faintly and walked away. I watched him disappear into the dimly lit corridor, unaware that the comfort of that small understanding would soon turn into a storm of misunderstanding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering why something that felt so pure and respectful could be so easily misread by others. I didn't know it yet, but the line between understanding and confusion was already beginning to blur. The next morning, I woke up to a strange silence in the house. My sister wasn't in her room, and the kitchen was empty. When I went downstairs, I found her sitting in the living room, her face pale and her eyes swollen. She didn't greet me the way she usually did. Instead, she looked at me for a moment and then turned away. Something felt wrong. I sat beside her and asked what had happened. She didn't answer immediately. After a long pause, she said, "I know you've been spending a lot of time with Abba." Her voice trembled slightly. "People in this house have started talking." I was shocked. For a few seconds, I couldn't even speak. I told her that nothing inappropriate had happened, that we were only sorting old photographs and talking about memories. But she didn't look convinced. She stood up and said, "Ariba, I don't know what your intentions are, but this doesn't look right. You don't understand how people think." Her words cut deep. I felt hurt that my own sister could doubt me. I tried to explain that Mr. Rahman had only shared his memories, and that all I had done was listen with respect. But the more I spoke, the less she seemed to believe me. Later that day, I went to my room and stayed there quietly. I could hear voices from the hallway, my sister's, her husband's, and then Mr. Rahman's. The tone was calm but heavy, like everyone was trying not to let the conversation turn into a fight. After a while, there was silence again. In the evening, Mr. Rahman came to my door and gently knocked. I didn't open it right away, but he said softly, "Ariba, I'm sorry if my actions have caused any discomfort between you and your sister." His voice carried genuine sadness. I opened the door, and he stood there, looking older than before. He said, "I never meant to create misunderstanding. I only found peace in remembering my past through your kindness. You reminded me of my daughter, she used to listen to me the same way." His words filled my eyes with tears. For a moment, I felt how much pain he had been hiding behind his calmness. I told him that I understood and that he didn't need to apologize. But he shook his head and said, "Sometimes, even when we mean well, the world chooses to see it differently. That's the nature of life." His words stayed with me long after he left. That night, my sister came into my room. She looked tired and guilty. She sat beside me and said, "Maybe I overreacted, but you don't understand how it feels to see my father-in-law talk so openly with someone else. I thought you were replacing me." I was surprised by her confession. I realized that her jealousy wasn't about mistrust, it came from insecurity, from the distance she felt in her own home. I held her hand and said, "You haven't lost anyone, Sana. You just stopped seeing the love that's still around you." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she hugged me. The air between us softened, but the pain still lingered. When we came downstairs later, Mr. Rahman was sitting quietly, reading a book. He looked up, smiled faintly, and asked if everything was fine. My sister nodded but didn't say much. There was peace in the silence, though it felt fragile, like a wound slowly beginning to heal. That night, I sat on the balcony again, staring at the stars. I thought about everything that had happened, the misunderstandings, the hurt, the loneliness. I realized how quickly people can twist something pure into something doubtful. Sometimes love is not about romance or attraction, it's about the quiet understanding that connects two lonely hearts. Before sleeping, I whispered to myself, maybe betrayal doesn't always come from actions. Sometimes it comes from how easily we stop believing in each other. The thought stayed with me until morning, like a quiet ache that refused to fade. The next morning, the house felt calm again, as if the storm from the day before had finally passed. My sister was kinder, quieter, and more thoughtful than usual. When I came down for breakfast, she had already set the table. She smiled faintly and said, "Let's not hold on to things that hurt." Her words were simple, but I could feel the sincerity in them. I nodded, grateful that the tension between us had started to fade. Mr. Rahman entered the room a few minutes later. He greeted us politely, the same calmness in his voice as always. But I could sense something different about him. He looked peaceful, but there was also a kind of distance in his eyes, as if he had already made a decision in his heart. After breakfast, he asked me to come to the study once more. When I entered, the room was filled with the soft light of morning. On the table lay a single envelope with my name on it. He said, "I wanted to give this to you before you leave. It's just a letter." His voice was steady but emotional. I hesitated, not knowing what to say. He smiled and continued, "You've reminded me of things I thought I'd forgotten, the value of kindness, the comfort of being heard. Don't let this world take that away from you." I thanked him, not realizing how much those words would stay with me. Before I could say more, he excused himself and left the room. I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter inside. In it, he wrote about how loneliness can sometimes make people look for meaning in unexpected places, and how my kindness had brought warmth back into his life. He ended the letter by saying, "Never let anyone make you doubt your intentions. True hearts are often misunderstood." Reading those words made my eyes well up. I folded the letter carefully and kept it in my bag, knowing it would always remind me that goodness doesn't need to be explained, it only needs to be felt. Later that day, I told my sister that I was leaving. She hugged me tightly, apologizing for her words and thanking me for coming. "Maybe I needed you to remind me what really matters," she said. I smiled and told her to take care of herself and her home. When I went to say goodbye to Mr. Rahman, he simply raised his hand in blessing and said, "May peace follow you wherever you go." As I sat in the car on my way back home, I kept thinking about everything that had happened. The house, once filled with silence and distance, had taught me something valuable, that not every story of love has to be romantic. Sometimes, love is found in understanding, forgiveness, and compassion. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal. But sometimes, when I looked at the letter, I remembered the feeling of that quiet house, the heaviness in its walls, and the people trying to heal behind them. I realized that betrayal doesn't always mean breaking promises, sometimes it means breaking trust, even unintentionally. And love isn't always about closeness, sometimes it's about giving someone the strength to move on. The story that began with confusion ended with understanding. I had gone to my sister's house thinking I would bring her comfort, but instead, I learned how fragile relationships can be and how easily emotions can be misunderstood. As I looked out the window, the sunlight falling softly on my face, I whispered to myself, some stories don't end with love or loss, they end with lessons. And with that thought, I closed my eyes, thankful that even in the midst of misunderstanding, kindness had found its place.